to this informative session on genetically modified organisms in our food and the impact that growing this food has on our health and on our environment due to the increasing amounts of herbicides that are used in the process. Specifically, the prolific use of glyphosate. Glyphosate is the key ingredient in Roundup. Roundup is one of the most popular and most widely used herbicides. It used to be in the United States, and now it is one of the most widely used in the world. And it's used a lot in GMO foods, but also non-GMO foods during the growing process. And that's happening at an increasing rate. And I'm proud to introduce a fellow Winchester resident, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who's going to conduct this discussion. She does want to keep it interactive, so if you do have questions along the way, please just, indicate that with an me. She is a senior research scientist at the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. Dr. Seneff received a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and biophysics and a minor in food and nutrition from MIT. Her PhD degree was also from MIT. Many years spent at MIT. I'm still there.
I'm still there.
You're still there. PhD degree is in electrical engineering and computer science. And her thesis was in the area of human auditory modeling of speech processing. So she's done a lot of correlating between, using computer science to understand data that she gains from the biology aspect, if that makes sense. So using computers the way that they're meant to be used. Dr. Seneff has published over a dozen papers in the last several years in the area of biology and medicine while using computer science to analyze this biological data. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Seneff, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm impressed. It's a cold night. I'm sure you have other things you might rather be doing, but I think this is very important. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I have to tell, first I want to tell you sort of my story. Starting about 7 years ago, I've long been interested in autism, and I've seen it get worse and worse. More and more kids are getting autism over time. So in 1970, the rate was 1 in 10,000. Today, it's 1 in 50. Something's happening. That's not a genetic thing when something goes from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 50. So what in the environment might be causing autism? So I went, starting 7 years ago, and I started studying autism, learning everything about it that I could, finding out that it's a very complex condition with a lot of comorbidities, digestive problems, sulfate deficiency, impaired sulfur metabolism, serotonin deficiency, all these things that I was discovering, writing them down, okay, this, looking at the toxins, maybe aluminum, mercury, lead, PCBs, all these things. And one by one, saying, well, yeah, maybe that's a factor, but it's not explaining the gut bacteria, so it's just always coming up short, for 6 years. Couldn't figure it out. Wrote papers, arguing how once you have disrupted gut bacteria, you can explain everything and why the brain would get messed up because of the gut-brain axis. Very clear. What's messing up the gut bacteria? Don't know. So September last year, a year and a half ago, I attended a conference. I heard Don Huber, who was a retired professor, he's probably in his 70s, from Purdue, expert on plant physiology and plant pathology, expert on glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, which is what you go buy at the hardware store and kill your weeds. He gave a 2-hour lecture explaining why he thought Roundup was a huge problem in our society today. And he's been going all around the world doing this. I was really at the edge of my seat when I heard his lecture because all of a sudden everything he said, oh yes, autism, oh yes, autism. I mean, it was perfect. It was a perfect match. I went home very, very excited. And I got introduced to Anthony Samsel, who is a really, really interesting person. He now lives on a farm where he grows organic food to feed his family. And he's a retired expert on chemicals in the environment. And he also knew a huge amount about Roundup. He started sending me tons and tons of email with piles and piles of papers, and I would just sit every day and read papers on glyphosate. And together we wrote a paper which was published last April, a year ago April, arguing that Roundup, glyphosate, is the most important chemical toxin in our environment, and furthermore, it can explain all the modern diseases: Alzheimer's, autism, digestive problems, arthritis, kidney failure, liver failure, cancer, everything can be explained by glyphosate. And it's in combination with other toxins because glyphosate, one of the things it does is it disrupts the liver's ability to detoxify other toxins. So people talk about acetaminophen being something that could be causing autism. The reason is because the liver can't detoxify it. And the reason why it can't is because there's glyphosate in the liver. This is what I believe in. I think it's extremely strong evidence. So we wrote this paper and we got a lot of play on the web, a lot of pushback from Monsanto. Monsanto is the organization, the company, huge chemical company that produces glyphosate. And they have a long history of producing all kinds of horrible things, chemicals, toxic chemicals in our environment, including DDT and Agent Orange and all of these things. And the growth hormone in the cows, I mean, all of this bad stuff has been produced by Monsanto. And they have a very good strategy for making sure we don't find out that this chemical is toxic. And this is what really frightens me, because they really fight back. They don't fund any research that's going to show that it's toxic. They clobber any researcher who dares to say that it's toxic. And so the information is being suppressed. The governments are naive. They think everything's fine, glyphosate's great. And the use of glyphosate is escalating in the environment, steadily going up substantially because they're producing all these GMO Roundup Ready crops. And they're the core crops of the food industry. Rice, soy, canola oil, sugar beets, alfalfa, tobacco, all these things. GMO Roundup Ready, what that means is you can spray this toxic chemical on the plant and it won't die. What does it do? It soaks up the Roundup and it gets into the food chain. Are we measuring it? Very little.
Also cotton.
Cotton, that's right. Cotton's another one. And now I think, do I have to buy organic clothing? You know, I start to think maybe I should buy used clothes, you know, because they'll be safe, you know, buy something old. So, and cotton goes into cottonseed oil, which is also a cheap oil that's used in the processed food industry. So on top of that, and this is something I didn't realize until very recently, even after we wrote our first paper, I didn't realize this. Anthony and I have a second paper which just came out maybe a week ago. It's on the web now on celiac disease, glyphosate and celiac disease, because we saw so many connections. And you know, you can just, one thing after the other, all these different, again, celiac disease, like autism, has a whole lot of other interesting things that, besides being allergic to wheat, which is the key thing about celiac disease, there's a whole bunch of other problems that they have with their health. Every one of them can be explained by glyphosate through some different mechanism. It's really, truly amazing. So we have a long paper that argues this case. The evidence is circumstantial because the research hasn't been done. You know, Monsanto makes sure that the research isn't done. If it is done, then they make sure the paper gets retracted. So we have the paper by Seralini in France, which is the only paper that studied glyphosate exposure to rats for more than 3 months. If you do it for 3 months, everything looks good. You wait for 4 months, you start to see problems. If you look over the whole life, you see kidney failure, liver failure, cancer, early death. So he published this paper over the whole life, and it lasted for a year or so before there was pressure put on Elsevier to get that paper retracted. And they retracted it last Thanksgiving. So that means that paper's not, you know, disregard that paper, pretend you never saw it. And the arguments for why it was retracted was because there weren't enough rats being studied to have statistical significance. All the studies that Monsanto and the other companies have done have been also a small number of rats, equally small, only looking over 3 months. So by that argument, all the papers should be retracted, and we don't have any research looking at whether a glyphosate is toxic or not. We have nothing. So we can just say, well, fine, we don't know, so let's just pretend it's not because that's convenient, and we'll go ahead and poison ourselves. We can do that. Or individuals can say, you know what, I think I'm not going to play this game. I'm going to go organic. This is what we've done. My husband and I, Victor's here. We're right there. You know, we made a commitment, and now we've gotten more and more determined to go organic. We look at a recipe, we go to Whole Foods. If we can get all the parts organic, okay, fine, we're making that. If not, okay, fine, we won't make that. You know, I mean, we're really being very, very serious about organic spices, organic cornstarch, organic beer, organic wine, and of course the core organic, you know, corn, soy. You basically don't touch those foods because they're so pervasively GMO, they're probably not safe to eat. I mean, it's really, we're in a crisis. Autism rates right now, I said 1 in 50. They've gone up in the last 6 years from 1 in 150 to 1 in 100 to 1 in 88, now to 1 in 50. You do the projection, you do the math, 1 in 2 by the quarter century mark. So I hate to picture this country when half the kids in the school system have autism. I mean, what's that going to do to the educational system? If we stay the course, that's what's going to happen because everything is going up. Nothing's changing. All the factors that are causing autism are not being fixed. So I think we face a major crisis, and I think every individual who knows this needs to tell everybody they know that this is true and get them to believe it and get people to go on organic diet. And if we do that kind of pressure, the farmers will start to grow organic. They'll probably appreciate it because they're getting poisoned as well. For example, Sri Lanka and El Salvador, 2 countries where they grow sugarcane. They spray the sugarcane with glyphosate right before the harvest. 3 or 4 days before the harvest, they spray it with glyphosate. This is a relatively new procedure they found is very effective. You can make it much easier for the combine to process. You make the plant go to seed because it's dying, so it goes to seed, produces a bigger crop. It gets a head start on next year's weeds. Everything's awesome. Only problem is the glyphosate goes into the sugar. And the farmers, the agricultural workers get sick. So they've had epidemics of kidney failure among young agricultural workers in Sri Lanka and El Salvador. A paper just came out from Sri Lanka targeting glyphosate. They said glyphosate, we analyzed very carefully, we looked at lots of things. Glyphosate is the problem. The country banned glyphosate. That was the action. I mean, Sri Lanka, that's a wonderful example. The country says, okay, you guys, you convinced me. We're not going to do glyphosate anymore. No more glyphosate on the farming. Last September. Just this past February, just now, basically. This month. This is February. They banned glyphosate in El Salvador. So that's 2 countries. We've got a few hundred more to go. I predict eventually, and I don't know how many decades, how many centuries, they'll all ban it. It's only a matter of time. U.S., we're probably going to be pulling up the rear because we've got Monsanto right here in the middle of our country, in Missouri. Monsanto is king in this country, so it's going to take a huge amount of pressure from the consumer to get the government to recognize that they have to stand up to Monsanto. They have to ban this product because it is causing tremendous amount of health problems in the country. So I will talk about this handout that I gave you. In the first page, I just pointed to, I have a ton of different things, of course, that I could have picked, but I just picked this subset of things if you wanted to watch some videos or read some stuff that's quite interesting. The first one, this is brand new, Tyrone Hayes. Tyrone Hayes is a researcher at Stanford. He's a professor at Stanford University. He's been studying atrazine for many years. Atrazine is another herbicide like glyphosate, and so it's quite popular in this country. Tyrone Hayes has been looking at frogs, and he's been finding that the atrazine really disrupts their reproductive system, especially the male frogs. They've become gay, actually. They become, it messes up, they become female. Their sexual system doesn't develop properly. And they also, of course, have fertility problems. And so so what's interesting is the way the company has fought back. This is Syngenta. And so he was claiming that Syngenta was persecuting him, and people thought he was just being a little bit crazy. But then Syngenta got a lawsuit on a different issue that required them to release some documents, and it became clear that he was right. So it's really interesting to watch. There's a short video, 18-minute interview with him, quite stunning, that has just come out, showing what he's up against by virtue of doing research in a space that's confronting one of these companies with one of these toxic chemicals, similar to glyphosate. So there's also a very interesting New Yorker article that talks about his whole story. So if you want to read, you can do the article. If you want to watch, just do the 18-minute video. The second one is a talk I gave to the Wellesley League of Women Voters. It has slides. It has more content if you want to know more facts. You can watch that. That's about maybe 35, 40 minutes, preceded by a guy who goes for 18 minutes singing the praises of GMOs. And I should really say a little bit about GMOs. A lot of people say they're substantially equivalent. That's also not true. And a new paper has just come out looking at GMO versus non-GMO soy. And in fact, they looked at organic versus conventional, which was using glyphosate as a weed killer, versus GMO Roundup Ready. Out of those 3, the only one that had contamination of glyphosate was the one that was GMO. The one that was conventional, even though they were using glyphosate to kill the weeds, it didn't have any. So because the plant soaks it up and doesn't die, you end up with a much higher residue. And this is what's happening with the GMO, and I'll show you with the plots, but all these GMO products have gone since 1998 when they were first introduced. This is really a very short time period, 15 years, between 0 and 90%. On the corn, the soy, the canola, the cotton, all these things have just gone up to 90% GMO Roundup Ready. And so the problem with those GMOs is that the Roundup is getting into the food and nobody's looking. Very, very serious problem. So that presentation then will give you some more facts. Seralini, I mentioned Seralini and his rats. You can watch a 12-minute video which will show his case for his experiment with his rats. And then there's a letter which I signed, produced by Mei-Wan Ho, protesting his retraction, the retraction of his paper. So now I refuse to do business with Elsevier. I won't publish papers. Elsevier controls most of the research literature. So you have to go, luckily the open access journals I think are really great, and you can publish in them and still get, you can actually make yourself heard better because you can write a more daring account of what's going on without getting it rejected because it's going to cross one of these companies. So El Salvador government, I mentioned that about the kidney disease and how they've become glyphosate free, banned glyphosate in the country as a consequence of the kidney disease. And then the paper is a heavy read, I think. It's a long paper on celiac disease that Anthony and I just published. You can get that at this website if you want to actually do some deep science. You can read that paper. You can see all about the connections between Roundup and celiac disease. So that's that. Now we just look at these plots really quickly. The first one is autism, looking from 1991 to 2010. Autism versus glyphosate. So this is Roundup application to corn and soy. And then I guess it only has the one. I have a lie here on the, sorry, I got a little bit distracted. But it's glyphosate applied to corn and soy is the red line. And the yellow boxes are the number of kids enrolled in the school system on disability with autism as their label. And those two plots lined up with a 0.99 correlation coefficient. So it's an extremely good match between the glyphosate and the autism on the corn and soy, which is the core crops that go into the processed food industry. Second plot just shows you that the blue line is all the herbicides. So you can see that over time, 1990 to 2010, overall the herbicides are steady. They're much more herbicide than insecticide. The red line on the bottom is insecticide. The blue line is herbicide. And glyphosate is the only one that's going up like that. So if you're going to look at correlations with anything else, you're not going to see it. Glyphosate is the one that matches. Question?
What's the difference between all of these? Can you just agree between the herbicide and glyphosate?
Glyphosate is a herbicide. The blue line is all the other herbicides, all the other ones. So only the glyphosate. They've been using it more and more because they think it's safe and because it's also cheaper because it's come out from under patent. And so they're thinking that they're doing a good thing by getting rid of atrazine and replacing it with glyphosate because they think it's safe. But the result is we're getting much more glyphosate in our food, and the government's doing very little monitoring because they think it's safe.
My understanding of the reading I've done is that glyphosate also functions in some way as a pesticide because it disrupts the internal workings in the pests. So it's acting as an herbicide that is a pesticide, so it's not just a straight
Yes.
herbicide up, it's pesticide.
Well, it actually, I think, is a universal life killer. I mean, it kills the
Exactly.
the microbes, the insects, the plants, and the humans. I think it's a universal, what do you call it?
Did you pick
Biocide.
because it's widely dispersed or because it's on the rise?
I picked it because it was causing disrupted gut bacteria. It was causing serotonin deficiency. It was causing sulfur metabolism screw up. These are all things that I had identified as problems in autism. It was causing all of them from the talk that this guy gave. There was no question in my mind. And the gut bacteria is a really big one. It kills off the good bacteria, causes the pathogens to overgrow. They produce toxins. The toxins cause problems, and you end up with, there's an experiment with rats. It's amazing because they looked at the specific toxin, p-cresol sulfate, that was showing up in the guts of these rats that had been engineered to have autism. And they could take that p-cresol sulfate and inject it into normal rats and create autistic symptoms. Very, very clear that that toxin is produced by C. difficile, which is a pathogen that's become an epidemic problem in the hospitals. That toxin could be directly connected to the autistic symptoms in these rats. I mean, it's stunning what they're finding. They're really working it out.
And could you just talk for a second how rare this is to have this kind of correlation?
Oh, it's incredibly
that
rare.
It's not a coincidence.
Correlation does not necessarily mean causation, and that's something they're screaming at us right now because they're really worried we're going to see all these correlations and we're going to think it might mean something. Normally, when you see a correlation like that, the first thing you're going to say, well, let me see if there's a cause. If I can get the argument that's going to show a causative connection. But, Monsanto doesn't want us to think that way. They want to make us believe that, correlations happen all the time and it's no big deal that you're getting a 0.99. I have not seen a 0.99 correlation coefficient between anything and anything besides this. And I've seen it not just with autism, but the same thing happens with Alzheimer's, with kidney failure, with pancreatic cancer. You can see the plots. It's amazing. And this is just data that's on the web, maintained by the US government. Anybody can make these plots. And there it is, 0.99 correlation coefficient. Obesity.
I don't understand how it can be denied.
That's what's shocking to me. I mean, to me, you look at those plots, you say, okay, I'm done, I'm convinced. But somehow people say, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, so we're not going to worry about this. I mean, okay, fine, don't worry about it, it's not my life, I mean, it's just, you can tell I have a little passion. So here's some other examples. This is kidney disease.
You said that research becomes so popular because it's cheap.
It's cheap and it's safe.
Crop yields too, is that why?
It's effective. Well, of course, it's not so effective because they're causing all the weeds to become, this is the other reason why it's going up, the weeds are becoming resistant. You have the Roundup Ready crops, you put the glyphosate on them, you get Roundup Ready weeds. So they're getting a bigger and bigger problem with resistance. They have to use more and more Roundup. So now what they're doing is they're designing 2,4-D ready. So they've got this other toxic chemical, 2,4-D. Agent Orange, right?
Which
Monsanto, yeah, our good buddy. Agent Orange. So 2,4-D is now you've got these crops that are BT. So BT corn, that's going to have the pesticide. The plant can produce the pesticide that's normally produced by a bacterium because you've thrown that into its gene. So it's not that you've put the pesticide on the plant, you've put the production capability in the plant. When you eat that plant, it's quite possible, given how biology works, that your gut bacteria can acquire that skill. Your gut bacteria can then produce the Bt toxin. The Bt toxin blows up the stomach of the insects that eat the plant. So it can blow up your stomach too. So we're having all this, and I have a plot here on that actually, getting ahead of myself, but here it is. Bt corn. This is the toxin that is produced by the plant. Normally it's produced by a bacterium. They took the bacterial gene, they've stuck it into the plant. Now the plant can make its own chemical that can keep the bugs from eating it. And this is looking at inflammatory bowel disease in the US versus the adoption of Bt corn. Another very good match. So basically it's causing inflammatory bowel disease in the insects and it's causing it in the humans.
So another question about it is, Jenny brought up a good point. Isn't part of the argument originally of why they created these GMO crops was because they claimed it was going to be, or at least you would think that they really did believe this at the time, and I think they still do, that they were going to be higher yields?
They thought higher yields, and also they thought that you would use less pesticide. They were quite certain. They assured everybody, if you adopt these Roundup Ready crops, you're going to be able to use less Roundup.
Right, but
it was a complete opposite of what they thought.
Well, and they've also touted it as solving world hunger.
Well, there's that too.
Argument you hear, which it hasn't done yet. But then, isn't it in the process of using all this Roundup? So not only is it creating pretty much toxic food, but isn't it also, in a sense, raping the soil?
It is. The soil is getting ruined. The microbes in the soil, which is what makes the soil healthy, the humus, they're getting killed. The soil is getting really, really hard.
So then the food you're eating,
the nutrients are getting depleted because the glyphosate chelates the iron and the zinc and the cobalt. So we're getting major. That's another problem with autism. You've got all these deficiencies in these minerals. They're getting chelated by glyphosate, and that's why you have that deficiency in the food and in the gut. So the bacteria actually need those nutrients to live. That's why they die, because one of the reasons is because the glyphosate is hiding those minerals and they can't get access to them, so they can't live. So it's really a very...
The FDA just approved an increase, a big increase in the amount of glyphosate particulate that could go onto the crops and be distributed out into the fields.
yeah, right.
Yeah, it was...
They keep raising the limits on how much it's allowed. They basically look and say, oh gosh, the soy has more Roundup than we have allowance for. Why don't we, instead of maybe fixing the problem, let's just raise the allowance limit. Because after all, this stuff is harmless, so why do we care? We just make it be whatever it needs to be to make sure that what we measure comes underneath that. We don't care what that number is because we're pretending that it's perfectly healthy. The stuff's not going to hurt us, so why do we care?
Stephanie, besides through papers and speaking to groups like this, have you contacted anyone from the EPA directly to sit down and talk? Will they talk? Will they listen?
Anthony has. He's been harassing them. He's very. I don't tend to be very political, but Anthony is definitely political, and he's been corresponding with them, and they've been sending him polite letters saying, "Thank you very much. You know, we don't really think there's a problem." So they're blind.
Is there a measurement also, a graph like this, that shows the decline in the level of nutrients in the actual vegetable itself?
There is, and in fact, there's not much data, but the data that I've seen, for example, I saw data on corn, Roundup Ready versus organic corn, and it was like something like at least a factor of 10 reduction in the amount of sulfur. Sulfur deficiency is a thing that's very clear in autism. I think it's a clear thing in our entire culture. I think we have a severe deficiency in sulfur and other minerals as well. Manganese was what cows who were exposed to GMO feed had a huge reduction in manganese and cobalt. Very important nutrients for their health. Cobalt is what you get for cobalamin. So if cobalamin B12 isn't working, I mean, you can get dementia.
Which is what Alzheimer's shows.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that reflected in when you look at the nutritional facts on the package of food?
You know,
That sort of
I don't think they're probably even, I don't know whether they're, I mean, if they put in a vitamin pill like they do in you know, how they have cereals with 100% of the minimum daily requirement, they're putting a vitamin pill in as a supplement, so I suppose it's there in that
they're
case.
injecting it with the supplements as well as.
You have to put the supplements in. In fact, they have to put much more supplements into the soil now because the glyphosate is, you have to add a lot more of these nutrients back because the glyphosate keeps eating them up, so,
Are the supplements natural?
in the soil, so they have to add more.
What they're putting back in, is it synthetic or is it?
Yeah, well, all the chemicals that they're using now as fertilizers are all synthetic, right? Except if it's organic, then you've got, yeah, so in fact, they're missing out on the sulfur. Sulfur is a huge problem. Sulfur doesn't have a minimum daily requirement. They think there's plenty. It's severely depleted under glyphosate. The chemical fertilizers don't have it. They have like nitrate and phosphate for the most part.
Right.
They're just kind of ignoring sulfur because they think it's not a problem, but I think it's a severe deficiency. It's a really, somehow has been totally missed in nutrition and in bio. I mean, people aren't, luckily there's a lot of papers on it, but there's tons of papers out there, but it's still a very weakly studied component of biology is sulfur. This is where I focus. I started really studying sulfur because I identified that as a problem with autism early on. And the more I looked, the more I realized that sulfur deficiency was behind many modern diseases. I can even explain heart disease based on sulfur deficiency.
Stephanie, I missed the correlation. What did you say was causing the vitamin B12 deficiency?
Cobalt chelation by glyphosate. Glyphosate chelates these cations, these small cations. They're +2, +3 metals and minerals, things like cobalt, zinc, iron, all these atoms. Actually, they're just individual elements of the periodic table that are really important.
How deep into the topsoil does this go? I mean, is it a foot down?
I don't know. I think the soil is getting, every year it's getting worse and worse. And we're going to reach a catastrophe there as well. And the food will start, you know, not even the crops won't be able to grow because the soil will be so depleted in nutrients. I think that's going to come as well. And even, for example, I think it contributes to global warming. I've been studying that lately because the foods don't capture as much of the carbon out of the air. So you end up releasing more carbon into the air and causing the global warming, contributing to the global
And why
warming.
aren't they?
For example, when you desiccate right before the harvest with glyphosate, it keeps them from taking the carbon back in when they die. They release it. When you do that quick death, that's going to cause more release. And also when you prevent the insects, it's interesting, when you prevent the insects from eating, they release more carbon. There's some interesting controlled experiments that were done sort of in greenhouses that showed that.
Other than celiac, have you learned much about food allergies?
Yeah, food allergies in general, I think, might even be, I might guess that they could be mostly due to the toxins in the food. I believe, for example, high fructose corn syrup, you know, everyone's learned that high fructose corn syrup is really bad. My suspicion is it's bad because it has glyphosate, because it comes from GMO corn, Roundup Ready, you know, and so I think it might be the glyphosate that's making it so toxic. I haven't proved that, it's just a hunch that I have. And then the wheat, of course, people have become all of a sudden allergic to wheat, right in step with this spraying the wheat with glyphosate right before the harvest.
When you're talking about the infertility issues that rise up out of this, if they're saying that we're saying that the plants, maybe the frogs and other things could produce the Bt toxins themselves, and eventually humans.
The microbes in your body.
Yeah, and the humans could eventually do that as well. Wouldn't that sort of indicate that in another 20 years we'll be seeing a spike like this
I think the infertility in humans is already there. I mean, we have all these people who are seeking fertility treatment, right? All the twins that are being born to the in vitro fertilization births. And actually, I think it's going to get worse with each generation. Even the embryo, the fetus will remember, because there's really interesting stuff that goes on in epigenetics, where the fetus is instructed, programmed. It's not the DNA, it's actually an upper level that controls the DNA that will program the fetus to live a certain way on the basis of what's seen in the environment that the fetus is in when it's in the womb. So when the fetus sees the mother's deficiencies, for example, in cholesterol sulfate, this is what I think leads to autism. The brain actually, the DNA becomes hypomethylated, and that causes a whole bunch of genes to turn off and a whole bunch of genes to turn on. And the net result is that it builds a brain that's going to operate on the assumption of severe sulfate deficiency. So it makes a different kind of brain that says, I'm not going to make those long distance connections because those are going to require a lot of sulfate. So we'll just kind of go light on that part. We'll concentrate on the short distance connections and produce a sort of person who can't really communicate, doesn't really have good sensory control, sort of the socialization and sensory are impaired because it costs too much sulfate to do that. Let's just not bother. You redesign the brain on the basis of an assumption because you, in the womb, you realize the sulfate's not there because the mother's not delivering it.
And based on that theory, well, actually it's not a theory, right, it's a fact, the human race is evolving to be 100% autistic.
I think so. I think that's where we're headed, yeah.
Autistic.
100% autistic,
That's
yeah.
really scary.
No, I know. Well, we may.
Is that rate of autism that we're seeing, that 99% correlation, is that statistically just the United States?
That's the United States. I mean, I would like to see, I'm actually getting people in Taiwan interested in taking a look there and seeing if they have something similar. So I'm hoping that some other people will study that in other countries. But so far, we've only looked at US. It's a very strong correlation in the US. But I don't have the data for other countries yet.
You mentioned earlier that you and your husband stay away from most or all corn?
Yeah, I won't eat corn unless I've bought like frozen organic corn. I won't eat it. If I get a corn, I just had a cornbread at a restaurant last night. I love cornbread, and I saw it there, and I just said, no, I don't think so. And then afterwards, we saw Victor went into this little room where they were selling some stuff, and they actually had organic cornmeal that they were selling, and I was like, shoot, I missed the chance to have organic cornbread. So you have to, do your homework. I won't touch it if it's not organic. Corn is really treacherous, in my opinion, because of the GMO Roundup Ready.
And how much do you trust the organic grass-fed beef?
I buy that, organically grass-fed beef. I hope for the best. Of course, even organic food, and now in America, you're allowed to use the manure from the cows that are eating this incredibly toxic food. That's the GMO Roundup Ready, very high allowances for glyphosate. They're eating that, and then they're producing manure, and the manure is going on the organic farms. So, I mean, you're not free of it just because we're eating organic.
But you have to hope then to a lesser degree.
You have to try. I mean, certainly I'm happy that there is organic as a choice. I'm very happy. In fact, Whole Foods has tremendous numbers of organic offerings. It's really great, and it's improved a lot. I'm very encouraged by that, by the way. The consumer is making a difference in the pressure. Whole Foods knows people want organic, and that is awesome. And you guys, I mean, that's what it takes. The individuals need to vote with their pocketbook.
And by definition, organic means that.
Oh, well, you'd be using manure rather than the chemical fertilizers, and you wouldn't be using glyphosate for sure. That would be a total no-no if it's organic.
It also doesn't Monsanto make Roundup Ready seed?
They make Roundup Ready seed. You wouldn't use that if you were organic.
That would not. That would cause it to not be.
Well, it could be contaminated for sure, especially if it's canola. I mean, you basically are not going to get canola that doesn't have contamination with Roundup Ready canola because it's just so pervasive. And it invades, it invades the farmer's crop. He can't avoid it.
Does glyphosate break down at any point?
Well, yeah, so Monsanto says it breaks down very quickly in the soil. People have done studies that have shown that in certain kinds of soil, particularly acidic soils with high mucus, it can last for 20 years.
What does it break down into?
Well, that's also very, very interesting, actually. There's that's a bit of a long, what does it break down into is the question. A lot of answers to that, because I've been studying that, and it's very interesting to see. There's a certain bacterium that's a pest in the hospitals. I mentioned C. difficile before, and there's another one, which I'm going to blank on the name, another one which can break down glyphosate. One of the very, very few microbes that can break down Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a pest in the hospitals, multiple resistant to all kinds of different antibiotics. One of the very few microbes that can break down glyphosate. Turns it into formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a toxin to the brain. So I think formaldehyde is another issue that we're seeing. If the glyphosate is broken down, you're not done. You're going to end up with another toxic product. Another one is that the liver can break down glyphosate into AMPA. AMPA is a slightly changed, I mean, it's sort of broken up into two parts. One of them is AMPA, which is the one they would measure to see in the urine, they would see a glyphosate breakdown product. The other one that's produced is something called glyoxylate, which I've just been reading about. That's the other product that goes with the AMPA, those two things. Glyoxylate is actually a very high glycating agent, much worse. So fructose is 10 times as bad as glucose in causing glycation damage, which is like when you read hemoglobin A1C, you have diabetes, you get your hemoglobin A1C measure, that's glycation. It damages the proteins. It damages the LDL particles that are, like everyone says, the bad cholesterol, that's LDL. It gets damaged by these sugars. And the one that's produced by breaking down glyphosate is worse than fructose. Fructose is 10 times as bad as glucose. So this stuff is really potent for messing up LDL. So the liver gets the glyphosate, breaks it down into AMPA and this nasty sugar. The sugar attacks the LDL. The LDL then cannot be returned to the liver because it's gummed up with sugar, and that's why it becomes high. Elevated LDL is a risk factor for heart disease, and it's gummed up with sugar so it can't be recycled. That's why it sticks around in the blood and causes that problem.
And our bodies are responding by attacking these inflammations as they occur in us, and that's what's...
The inflammation, yeah, well, the inflammation in the gut is a direct result of all these toxic overgrowth of these bacteria that are producing these toxins. And so then you have an inflammatory reaction. The immune system comes in and tries to kill those bacteria that are overgrowing. More questions?
Going back to the issue of the children who aren't going to be having children, perhaps.
Yes.
Or the children who are all going to be autistic, perhaps.
Yes.
My understanding of the GMO crops is that they're being fed, they're used as feed to livestock
Yes.
and food-producing animals such as chickens.
Right.
Now, the deal with the chickens is the chickens lay the eggs, and the glyphosate, from what you just already said, probably the eggs have the instruction to grow the
Interesting.
BT toxin. And isn't that the suspension that they use to make the vaccination?
You're really imaginative. I hadn't even thought of that possibility. So she's saying that. No, I know. I mean, that's the thing, you know, you can be very naive and you can say what can go wrong, or you can start to think about what could go wrong if you have an imagination, and you can take it all the way from and once the gene gets into the animal, gets into the reproductive system, gets into the egg, gets into the vaccine, certainly you could imagine that path could happen.
Not just what we eat, what we eat eats.
Yeah,
And if the eggs are being laid and there's some production of that albumin,
that's a good
that
point.
has the DNA
Whatever's in there could end up in the vaccine. Even the glyphosate could end up in the
is
vaccine.
vaccines, and the vaccines are mandated.
Right.
We're seeing this spiking going on with a direct correlation in the amount of glyphosate.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that sort of suggest that there's some relationship?
It would, and in fact, I have a plot. I don't have it with me, but I have a plot which has the autism, the glyphosate, and then I have a third plot on top of that, which is simply the number of reports of adverse reactions to vaccines in the VAERS database. The VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. If you plot the number of adverse reactions over time, it has a very good match with the other two curves. All three of them line up.
Well, they just had in India a couple of years ago when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation took over the, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of doses of vaccine for, I think it was polio. And they gave the vaccines into these villages and vaccinated, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of kids. And 25,000 or so died. From,
Whoa.
Yeah, right after the vaccinations. And, you know, it never really made it into the mainstream news. The CDC had a report up on it for a while, which I saw, and then they took it down.
Yeah.
You know, so it's hard to sort
I
of
know,
know
it's really
what
hard
goes
to
on
know.
because They remove these reports. You know, the complaints come in from the scientists, it gets spread.
I know. I've discovered that myself, actually, because I found, so I was looking at the animals, and that's another thing to look at, all the extinctions that are going on. The frogs are having trouble, the bees, as you know. and the bats, the white-nosed infection in the bats, and starfish on the west coast are dissolving. Their skeletons are dissolving. And the butterfly, the monarch butterfly, all of these animals, I investigated each one and I could find a connection to glyphosate in all of them. And the monarch the starfish was really interesting because I found an article that said that because they're growing these oysters offshore in California, and then turns out they spray the oysters with glyphosate in order to kill the grass that's growing around the oysters. So this means even oysters aren't safe. I would have thought oysters would be safe, but they're not. So the starfish tries to eat the oyster, gets contaminated with the glyphosate, and then gets this illness. And so I saw this article, and then I wrote down the pointer to it, and later on I went back just to check the facts, and it was gone. It was like this announcement that said it had been removed because of some copyright issue or some such thing. So there's people out there who are policing these articles to make sure that they disappear, you know.
So do you think there is an Arab Spring coming in the medical?
I
to
do.
me,
I definitely
overwhelming.
do. Absolutely. I sure hope so.
It seems like
There's an Arab Spring coming.
Everybody has a little bit of their finger in the pie.
I know. It's right coming and going because all these chemicals on the foods are making us sick, and then you've got the same chemical company who's treating us with all the chemicals, with the pharmaceuticals, you know. So it's a great system for them. They can stuff their pockets and we can get sick. And I think that is what's going on. I mean, you sort of can't see it any other way, you know. Did we cover all the plots? I think we had celiac disease, and that one you can sort of guess, but that's the glyphosate usage on wheat, not because it's GMO wheat, but because to kill it at the harvest versus the incidence of celiac disease. Not quite as good a match as the autism, but a pretty good match. So I think that's all my plots. There's a bunch more of these plots, by the way. Nancy Swanson is a physicist, a really interesting person. I've been in correspondence with her. She produced these plots. And she's been looking at all kinds of data and finding things that are correlated. So when she finds a correlation, I go and I do the research to see if I can explain the science behind it. If we can find a connection through the science, then we've got the story both ways. And she's finding all these incredible things, including obesity and pancreatic cancer and thyroid cancer, and Alzheimer's is as good a match as autism. It's equally stunning. So the autism and the Alzheimer's, I think, are the same disease in the elderly and in the young. So if you want your kids not to have autism and you don't want to end up with Alzheimer's and be a burden to them, go organic.
There's one side that will say we can't simply feed the whole population with organic. Is that true?
I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true. We actually waste a huge amount of food.
These type of whole foods that only serves a certain population.
Right, that the poor can't afford to eat organic and that people will starve because there won't be enough food. This is the worry that Monsanto puts out there, and they claim that we are saving the world and rescuing it from starvation. I think...
But that's a holdover from the original intent. We knew clearly in the 50s and 60s it was world hunger.
Yeah, well, of course...
We were able to get more bounty out of the acreage.
Right.
The problem was the for-profit model.
But also the thing that's happening is that we're destroying the soil, we're decreasing the fertility, so we're going to have a reduction in the crop productivity. Right, it's not sustainable. You really have to think in terms of sustainable agriculture. And I think that if we put our brains to it, we can find ways to grow organic more efficiently. I mean, we can do robotics. Maybe we can find a way to get robots to pull the weeds, you know?
But it also seems too that the bottom line of all of this is cost and profit, right? Everybody, farmers, Monsanto, everybody wants to make money.
Yes.
So if government is cutting subsidies, then I can see farmers wanting to still make their money.
Yeah.
So they feel trapped in having to use these pesticides to make
Right, well,
money
in fact...
to feed people. So it seems to me like the starting point has to come from the government. We need to have these subsidies to support these farmers.
But the subsidies are subsidizing the big farms that are using the chemical methods. They should be subsidizing the organic farms. They should be promoting the small organic farms.
Subsidizing anybody, I agree, but it seems like it has to kind of come from, there has to be money involved to get anything to change, unfortunately.
Well, I do think that the consumer has a lot of power because in this country, a lot of things are driven by the consumer. If the consumer wants it, somebody's going to find a way to produce it. And I think we're seeing that because the organic is really growing. The opportunity to buy organic in a number of different products.
And the prices are coming down.
Prices are coming down. I think that the consumer can do it all by themselves, I think.
Roche Brothers just published a statistic that their organic growth in their business has grown 10 times.
That's
in the
wonderful.
last 9 months.
That's so wonderful to
Yeah.
hear.
But it's such a tough, I mean, glyphosate would be just a great thing to rally around because that seems so, I saw your video, I watched it twice. 'Cause
Oh,
I
great.
memorized some of the things with the shikimite you had the back.
Right, right.
But the thing that's so compelling about it's so compelling as a layperson, the logic of the way it's described.
Yeah.
But then you see, everything from King Corn movies and how they, the government actually subsidizes the corn industry, which artificially keeps the corn low.
Right.
And as a consequence, they need to find other uses for the corn, and lo and behold, the advent of corn syrup and everything else. So it's such a mess.
It is. It's really, it's daunting to think about how you would turn it around.
It really is staggering.
I've read that Monsanto is one of the largest and most well-funded lobbies.
Yes.
On K Street. Is there any effort to try to influence the legislators?
Well, yes.
Is there anything like-
I mean, Anthony's doing that.
Years ago, we all protested against Monsanto.
It's the consumer, though.
Yeah.
It's gonna be
The consumer drive, I think when, the consumer will win, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
If we get enough people to recognize that they have to. I mean, you have to sort of, it's hard because when you just eat a sandwich and you don't feel anything bad, you don't think I'm poisoning myself. You don't see the direct connection between that particular meal and your health, because it erodes your health slowly over time. And then down the road, you end up with Alzheimer's or cancer, and you don't realize it's caused by all that incremental, a little bit of poison here, a little bit of poison there. So to make that commitment to say, I'm going to go organic, it's hard, I think, for people to see that, to believe that that's what it's about.
This is a little bit off GMOs, but I like to do experiments with myself. So I took artificial dyes out of my diet for, Kim told me to do it, for like a year and a half or 2 years or something. I ate a bag of Swedish fish, and within probably 15 to 30 minutes, I was in pain. And I knew it was a Swedish fish. So I didn't eat them again, and then I ended up having like a straight colored cupcake months later. And it was immediate. So I think there are certain things
You can tell. And certainly a person who has gluten.
your body, you will notice right away.
Yes, and people who have gluten intolerance will notice right away if they eat the wheat. There was a paper that was just published, and I just saw the abstract, but it was neat because they did a study with people who had inflammatory bowel disease, and they fed them organic heritage wheat. So the wheat has also changed. It's not GMO, but it's genetic engineering to make the wheat different. So they had the heritage wheat, but it was organic, and they compared it to the regular wheat grown with glyphosate. And when they switched to the organic wheat, they had a huge improvement in their symptoms of inflammatory bowel disease over 6 weeks of just changing that one thing in their diet. So I hope these studies will come out as people start to see that this connection. They say, well, let me do an experiment to see if I can prove it. That's what we need, because right now, for me, it's just read the literature, write the interpretation. I'm not doing the experiments, I'm a computer scientist. I analyze it with a computer, but that's all I do.
Boycotts are one way that the companies will certainly respond. I mean, if it did their bottom line, the mothers who boycotted Cheerios,
Yes.
they've changed them because of that boycott happening. Unfortunately, Kellogg's is still making a whole lot of other things that still have GMOs in them.
Well, they're probably testing that one product to see how it sells.
Yeah, and those mothers made a huge difference with it. But I think the bigger issue that we've got is, as a society, for us to be able to survive what they're trying to do to us, with companies like Monsanto, Dow, DuPont, Syngenta, and Bayer, all of them are in it together.
Right,
are
right.
doing this to us. We have got to get together as a group and realize this is not a partisan issue, and we have got to put our votes behind people who are going to vote for us against the destroyers.
Yes.
We've got to do that, because if we keep voting on this crazy partisan, all Democrat, all Republican, and they're all bad and they're all good, that's never going to fly. We've got to vote based on, even Elizabeth Warren, I wrote to her a year and a half ago when I first discovered what was going on with glyphosate, and I wanted food label as the first step. And she wrote back to me and said she couldn't vote for it because she wanted in this room right now got a letter from her that she wrote just recently, and Elizabeth has changed her tune.
Super. That's super. That's worth a clap.
And I know that that's because she's hearing it from enough people, and every person, including me, who writes to her says that if you don't vote for it, you're not getting my vote again. Period, the end.
You know, that's a perfect segue, and then we can get back to more questions for Dr. Seneff, but that is a good segue that I did want to introduce two people here tonight. Jason Lewis is one. I think most of you in the room probably know who he is, right? Most of you. He's a representative of our district at the State House, and he is running for State Senate. I'm going to let him come up and explain a little bit about the primary that's coming up on Tuesday, and then also want to introduce Marty here, who runs the Mass Right to Know organization, which, if you're interested, he has some literature over there, and he has a petition that you can sign, and there's also tons of information. He has an incredible website. It's just marightoknow.com, right? About getting GMOs labeled in the state. And so, as you were just saying, it's all about our voting power and all about our voice, and every individual makes a difference. It all adds up. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to sign the petition and go online and sign the petition. And then, did you want to say anything else about that?
I can say as much as you want me to say.
Oh, .org, I'm sorry.
Well, that works.
Okay. But first, let Jason come on up, and then...
Thank you, Chair, and Vanessa,
Oh,
for
goodness.
inviting me tonight. And thank you, Stephanie. That was really, really eye-opening.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the very important research you're doing. My name is Jason Lewis, and I'm the representative for Stephanie. I also serve as the Vice Chair for the Public Health Committee for Massachusetts. And I'm in... you want me to use this, or just hold it? Okay. So that has... I'm in my third term now, and since my first term, I've had the opportunity to be very active in public health. So obviously, there's some very huge, momentous issues here that we're touching on, and it relates to public health. It relates to our environmental health. It relates to issues of economic justice and social justice, and how this impacts different kinds of communities. So there's a lot, obviously at play here. I certainly agree with the point that, we can, the place we can all make a difference is in the choices we personally make in our own lives, how we live our lives, the consumption choices we make, certainly food choices we make, but other consumption choices as well. There's also major federal policy implications here, and you mentioned Elizabeth Warren, and certainly, the decisions that are made by the Department of Agriculture and by the Environmental Protection Agency are all very salient to, issues of our agricultural and our food policy. So I don't, as a state legislature, I have my own opinions on those, and I can weigh in just like you do. But let me speak to, just for a minute, what we're doing, one of the things we're doing at the state level that you can all also be part of. And a number of you have already been active on this, which is great. And that relates to labeling of GMO foods and requiring the labeling. So that's something that is already the case in, I think it's close to 60 countries in the world. Pretty much every advanced country either, bans GMOs outright, or at least requires the labeling of food so that consumers, can make an informed choice. And the two notable exceptions in the world are the United States and Canada, where we don't. So this battle is, I'm sure there's efforts at the federal level to do this, but it's really like many battles right now, because the federal government is so dysfunctional, a lot of these are really being fought on the state level. So there's a number of pieces of legislation that are filed in the Massachusetts legislature that would require labeling. They are all before the Public Health Committee, and there was a public hearing, which, who was there? Kim, you were there, Vanessa was there, Dr. Seneff was there, and sorry we didn't let everyone know beforehand, but those bills are still in the committee. The committee hasn't yet fully finished analyzing them and made a decision on them. And the way that any legislation works is it's assigned to a committee. The committee does its sort of homework and analysis, and then what we want is that the committee gives the legislation a favorable recommendation, which means it then moves forward in the legislative process. So that's a very important key step. And I don't believe to date that any GMO labeling bill has received a favorable recommendation, but the legislation, they're fairly new, right? And but this is fairly new, so sometimes it does take a while for legislation to move forward. So the way that you all can play a role in this is by, having your voices heard. So those who were at the hearing, that was a great opportunity to do that. But everyone else, you can still write a letter, to the Public Health Committee and share your advocacy, for requiring labeling, GMO labeling. So one of the bills I'll just mention, but anyone who's interested in doing this, what I would suggest is just contact me by email, and I can give you the necessary information, in order to write to or email the Public Health Committee. But for example, I just brought with me one bill tonight, which was House Bill 2037. This happens to have been introduced by a state representative named Mike Moran, but there are a number of other bills as well. And so what you can do is, again, by contacting the committee and letting them know that this is a very important issue to you, and you want to see that this legislation move forward with a favorable report. So that's a step that everybody in this room can take to have your voice heard. And that would be, if we were able to get a GMO labeling bill to move forward in the Massachusetts legislature and ultimately to be signed by the governor and enacted into law, that would be huge. And Massachusetts is often a progressive leader on many issues, and it's a domino effect. Typically when one state moves on something, takes the lead, other states all, we all look at each other and see what different states are doing, and that's how you get the ball really, really rolling. So clearly that's not a solution to everything, but it is a way. I don't believe, is there? I don't believe there is, but does Connecticut? It's.
So both Connecticut and Maine, in the first week of June 2013, passed provisional GMO labeling bills that are contingent upon neighboring states passing similar
that's the key,
legislation
okay.
before they take effect. So they're on the books, but they don't, it's what's called a trigger clause. And that's basically it was a compromise. Legislators had feared lawsuits, so they didn't want to go to court.
So that means anything that is brought to the state of Massachusetts has to be labeled, that's sold in the state of Massachusetts.
The legislation that we're pushing would be anything, packaged food that's sold in Massachusetts. Contains anything in the ingredients that you have to say.
Jason,
So just like we label for other things on there that are required, it would just be another requirement on the packaging, on the labeling.
a
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
I was at a meeting that was being sponsored by the Sierra Club and a state representative over in Somerville, and we were talking, at that night we were talking about the efforts to fast track the Trans-Pacific Act. And today, I just learned that the head of the secret committee of corporate people who is designing the Trans-Pacific Act is an executive of Monsanto. Surprise, surprise. At that meeting, we were told that Mike Moran was in favor of the TPP and has been in touch with Monsanto representatives. I would dispute your advice to go and contact Mike Moran in his office because I don't think he's going to listen to us. In a representative democracy, although you hope that the representatives or a representative republic, you would hope that the representatives would be accountable to, I think that we have to go for representatives who are willing to listen to us directly and actually make the votes that enact what it is we want to happen, which is the GMO labeling. I want to know.
So I have no idea what you're referring to there with Mike Moran. I have no idea. But all I'm saying is this is an example of, you can read the legislation, see if you agree with it. All I'm suggesting, and this happens to be one, we looked at a number of the bills. This one seemed to be the most comprehensive. All I'm suggesting is that that's something you can all do, which is say, I want to see, a GMO labeling bill, move forward, get a favorable report from the Public Health Committee, and ultimately be enacted by the Massachusetts legislature. So it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with Representative Moran. It's just he happens to have filed the bill.
The Trans-Pacific Act was enacted on steroids. it basically sets up a supra-international conglomeration of corporations who will act on their own, apart from sovereign law countries, and be able to do what they need to do and want to do without us being able to interfere. It's a pretty amazing thing, what's going on.
So I'm gonna wrap up. So, but if anyone who wants to reach out to me, to the Public Health Committee on this issue or any other related issues to public health, just, you can just email me or call my office. I can give you my email. It's jason.lewis@mahouse.gov, but you're probably not gonna remember it. Just Google me. I'm not the Jason Lewis who's the male model in Sex and the City. That's not the one. I'm also not the Jason Lewis who's a right-wing talk radio host in Minnesota. We definitely don't have the same politics. So you'll find me. But anyone who's interested should contact me on that. And if you want to understand the bills better, whether it's Mike Moran's bill or anyone else, we can get you the text of the bills. You can read them yourself. You can see if that's what you support, or talk to Vanessa and Kim. Are very, very familiar with this as well. But anyway, this is one thing that we can all do. That is something where there's other people working on this already. We can be part of a growing coalition. And that's good tonight. We need to know that Connecticut had, and you said it was Maine, had actually, that's interesting. Acting in a kind of provisional way like that's very unusual.
California.
So
It's interesting.
yeah. But again, doing it just outright, if we just went ahead and did this, not contingent on anybody else or anything, would be a very, very, very important step. Yeah. Well, in Massachusetts, we are a progressive state. We've been first in many areas, right? So why not in this area as well? So, there's a lot of big issues here around also local agriculture and sustainable agriculture. Animal welfare is another component of this as well. We can talk about a lot of different aspects of it, but this is one needed step we can make.
Can I put you on the spot and ask you just a really quick question? I know you're probably getting pressure from people like Mark to put one away, but do you get active pressure from people from big food to get involved in your own business?
Sure. Oh, sure. They're not sitting idly by.
What's the vibe over there?
Well, you heard it in the public hearing, right? There, absolutely. The food industry. This isn't just Monsanto as the bad guy. The food industry at large. There are very strong vested interests who are very concerned that if labeling were required, then the sleeping giant would wake, because all of these consumers who really aren't paying attention today. Remember, those buying organic, it's great that people in this room, it sounds like we're a very well-informed audience of our shopping at Whole Foods or at Roche, but 90% or plus of the population is not buying organic. I mean, maybe because they don't know or care about it, or also because it's often more expensive. So they're not overly concerned about that. But if GMO labeling really took off and this became something that was the case all across the country, that would be earth-shattering. People would really pay attention, and there would be many more sitting in this room tonight, right?
Which voice for you is louder? Do you notice? Just curious.
Well, I think that you saw this at the hearing, right? The food industry isn't there watching this closely. They're not overly concerned yet, because I don't think they see enough public. That's what we were talking about when I came in. We have concerned citizens, we have some voices out there, but we haven't yet seen sort of a coalition, a strong coalition. Like what we ideally would have here is a coalition of public health organizations, environmental groups, various different social justice organizations, healthcare, various groups that coming together that all have, a take on this, and building support, because legislation, there's 5,000 pieces of legislation that are filed in the Massachusetts legislature every year, and thousands of them are very good, worthy bills, and they relate to all kinds of issues. So one of the major challenges is just getting sufficient attention and focus, and that takes grassroots efforts. So at this point, I would say it's not yet, it hasn't yet, it's starting to sort of, the awareness is growing, among policymakers, but I don't think it's risen yet to that level. But that's what we all have to do. That's our job,
Is this going to come to vote too, this GMO labeling?
That's what I'm saying. It won't even get to a vote.
This year, yeah, I thought they were going to push it off until next year.
Well, the first step is you can control it. Any legislation has to be, every bill goes to a relevant committee, and it has to then be, in order to even move forward, the committee would have to give it essentially a thumbs up. And that's the first step. And we haven't yet gotten that far. So that's what we should be focusing on right now, just to get that, would be a big step forward.
And that's where Mark goes in.
Yeah.
Working with Jason to try to make that happen.
Now, I would vote for it, but we need the rest of the committee, and we need to convince, and the chair of the committee in particular, Representative Jeff Sanchez of Boston, has a lot of say over legislation moving forward. So
Martin, what do you see as the growth or the pace? Because I think the clarion bells are starting to sound personally, and I'm a lay person, right? So I'm just starting to see it in my own eyes, and if I'm seeing it, people who are much deeper. What are you seeing as far as someone who's trying to, are you seeing the pace pick up?
Yep. Thank you, Representative. So my name is Martin Dagoberto. I'm a co-founder of Massachusetts Right to Know GMOs, and we've been organizing since summer of 2012 to build a grassroots network of safe food advocates from across the state that are declaring their right to know what they're eating. We're actually working in coalition with MassPIRG, the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, and the Northeast chapter of MoveOn.org to try to mobilize grassroots support for GMO labeling. But I'll tell you, when we started organizing at the state level, it actually grew out of local educational efforts in the Hilltown Non-GMO Working Group. Ed Stockman, fourth generation organic farmer, has been doing education on this stuff for 12 or 13 years now. But what we saw in 2012 was the California Prop 37 ballot initiative, which was narrowly defeated. The industry spent $45 million on this campaign, literally $1 million a day, new record, carpet bombing the airwaves with disinformation and lies, and were able to defeat the ballot initiative by, it was a 49-51 spread.
What was that initiative?
It was to label GMOs in California,
okay.
and actually that's the same language that Moran's bill is based on, Prop 37. But when we saw that flame extinguish, we saw dozens of others pop up across the country. There's now legislation being considered by more than half of the states, every state in New England. So since 2012, we've seen the dramatic rise in GMO-free this, GMO-free that, many different groups popping up, and several national coalitions formed. And if you look at the social media indicators and people's and the press on this, it's all in very much an upward trend. In Massachusetts, we were able to gather 16,000 petition signatures simply through people's social networks, passing along online petitions, which is one very good way that people can share this. We have the petition on our website, marightoknow.org, and that's really useful because that actually allows us to email specific districts when we say we need a bunch of calls to this decision maker. We can do that. So that's one action item, is the Move On petition on our website. But where things are at right now in Massachusetts, now I did say that Connecticut and Maine have those trigger clauses, right? Vermont passed it in their House last year. Their Senate is picking it up. It just made it out of a subcommittee 5-1 or 4-1, and it's now another vote is expected any week, probably the beginning of the month. They're halfway there. They don't have a trigger clause. They're very hardline, trying to go with no trigger on that, okay? Rhode Island just introduced 2 bills, a lot of energy there. In Massachusetts, there are 5 bills by 4 main sponsors. There's about 20 total sponsors and co-sponsors. It's in front of 2 different committees, the Public Health Committee and the Ag and Environment Committee, okay? And both of them, all the committees are subject to what's called the Joint 10 deadline, which is March 19th. When the bills get introduced, they all get dished out to the different committees, and then the committees have until March 19th of the second year in the 2-year cycle to say, yes, this should pass, no, it shouldn't pass, or it should go to study. And that's what we're coming up against. We don't know if it's going to get voted on before the 19th. That's why we're organizing across the state to get people calling their legislators, especially in the key districts of both those committees. There's 33 different districts that we have all listed on our website. If you know anyone that does live in those districts, we really need them calling their legislators. But we do have I believe six sponsors or endorsers of GMO labeling on the Ag and Environment Committee out of 17. That's 6 out of 17, and we have 4 on the Public Health Committee. So we're not there yet. We don't have majority, and we don't have any official indication that they're actually going to vote on it yet. But we have been meeting with leadership in the State House over the last couple weeks. They are becoming more aware of it. They are talking about it, and they are telling us that they're hearing from their constituents on it. But it's not loud enough. So we really need everyone's help to share the petitions, share our action alerts, to get people to call their legislators, because a call is worth 1,000 petition signatures. I mean, a personal visit is worth even more than that, of course. But we know that we have the representative on board here.
Just to echo that, the legislators that serve on those committees, Public Health and the Environment and Natural Resources, that it is likely the case that they're not necessarily opposed, but just don't know enough about it. So that's another reason why, contacting legislators and the grassroots advocacy that you're doing is so important, because it's, for many, legislators, policymakers, it's a relatively new, issue. They just don't know that much about it. So I suspect it's not the case that, most of those other legislators are, already made up their minds that they're opposed to it.
We haven't heard anyone say they're opposed. The only opposition we've gotten is people saying it should go to the federal level. And I can understand not wanting to deal with it. Let's let the feds deal with it. But we know that how tied in Monsanto is with the federal government. We know that we can't wait. And we also know that the industry is working on watered-down legislation that could actually make it illegal to mandate GMO labeling. So we need the states to set the standard for meaningful legislation, so that when we do hit that critical mass that we're talking about, we have labeling legislation that does its job at letting people know what they're eating. And it's important to say that by passing GMO labeling, we're not making a value judgment on GMOs. Okay, we're not saying that we need to prove that they're dangerous in order to have labeling. You don't label an ingredient that's proved dangerous. You ban it, you remove it from the supply. We simply want to have labels so that consumers can make an informed choice, so parents can know what they're feeding their families, especially parents with kids with allergies. We know that some people are need to be much more conscious about possible allergens and new compounds in their food. Anyways, if anyone didn't get a chance to sign a petition, if you put your email down, you'll also get alerts from us. But marightToKnow.org is a whole bunch of details there, all the language of the bills, the committees and everything on there. We'd love to have people on there and spreading it, social media and all that. But we need your help in getting people out. So I'm glad that you're all here and getting educated. Oh, and one thing too, you may like to know that we had a meeting yesterday with both the chairs of the Public Health Committee, Rep. Sanchez and Senator Keenan, with Dr. Michael Hansen from the Consumers Union. He's a world-renowned expert in GMOs. You can check out some of his stuff, and he laid down some of the latest science showing that there is a substantial difference between GMO and non-GMO. I'll give you one more thing. The whole reason that the federal government does not require labeling is because they consider them substantially equivalent. They're saying that if you engineer a plant to produce its own insecticide in every bite and every cell, it's materially identical to the non-GMO and therefore does not require any safety testing. The federal government does not perform or require any safety testing of new GMO crops. So we need labeling so that we can make that choice.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Seneff, for all that.